And welcome everyone. So today we are going to be tackling the Kuva weapons. It has been a while since we talked about the Kuva weapons. We've had a complete damage rework and a lot of new things added to the game since we last really went over all of them. And with the Coda and the Infested Liches on the horizon, there are going to be a lot more weapons to talk about in the future. So I'd like to have all of the Kuva weapons, this video, updated, and the Tenet weapons, a different video, updated to what you should be using on them, both build-wise and element-wise. For that, for those of you that are unfamiliar, over on Brozime.com, you can access my progenitor list, where I do also keep all of the information about my suggested elements for the Kuva weapons. The Kuva weapons and Tenet weapons are on this page, and when the Coda become available, you can rest assured that they will be updated on the same page as well. For that, we have a few things to note before we get into this about how I am kind of tiering these, which is also available on the full list below this. But before that, even this note is very important, which is that for this, in choosing elements, you do need kind of a basic understanding of modding. Weapons that you could go pure Toxin on, for example, can use one mod to go into Corrosive or Viral, and that is usually the goal if you are going to be picking Toxin. And it is also worth noting that a blanket suggestion for every single one of the Kuva and Tenet guns can just be magnetic, if you hate Eximus specifically. Specifically against Eximus, every single weapon with magnetic added to it is generally going to be at least as good as any other given element, if not better. So if you absolutely hate Eximus, you kind of have one safe choice to go to on all of the guns, not melee weapons. Otherwise, how these things are tiered out is important because it's not like any of these weapons can't do content, but there does need to be some differentiator in terms of which ones are more worth it than others. So we have excellent, good, and mastery fodder. Excellent is just fantastic weapons that can sometimes compete with incarnins, or at least some incarnins, and are just really good weapons to have in your arsenal. Good weapons, solid weapons that you can just do content with, but sometimes have pretty bad downsides, and just straight up mastery fodder. These are the weapons that are just the worst of the bunch on this list, and are generally only going to be farmed if you need to get the mastery out of them, and are certainly not worth getting max percentages on. For that, we are going to be going through these in alphabetical order as they are presented on this page in terms of what their builds are and if they are worth using or not, and just general ramblings about it, starting with the Kuva Ayanga. The Kuva Ayanga is, unfortunately, we're starting with mastery fodder. Now, this weapon is fine, and you can see I have a Toxin one here, which is suboptimal. You probably do technically want a heat one, but this weapon's not really worthwhile anyway. All of the Necromechs come with a Mausolon, which is usually just going to completely outperform this anyway as a thing that you must get on your progression. So the chances that you're going to get and mod this thing completely to any effect are kind of slim and none. We are, of course, going to be showing this. I'm going to show it on a consistent group, that just being our usual level 225 Steel Path Corrupted test. And it does kill them, kind of, at least. I mean, better than you might expect an arc gun too. It's serviceable, but not something that I would ever suggest you go through the process of like getting all the mods that this thing absolutely needs to start chewing through these enemies. And especially whenever you see the other arc gun that is on this list, you will quickly realize why this just is not worth it. I mean, if this were heat, it would be better, and heat is my recommended element for this. But it's not going to be great. It's just simply not going to be, like, phenomenal. It's very slow. Arc guns have limited ammo. You're not going to be bringing that into, like, EDA or any place where you could sneak it in to great effect. So the Kuva Ayanga is what it is, and we can quickly move on to the Kuva Brakk. Now, the Kuva Brakk was one that surprised me. The Kuva Brakk is much better than I thought it was going to be, and that is mostly due to the addition of semi-pistol cannonade. A lot of the semi-automatics got hugely buffed because just on secondary specifically, getting 1.5 punch through and 300% damage is pretty huge. Now, big thing about the Kuva Brakk that I particularly like it for is that you do not need an arcane for this gun. And furthermore, it is a wonderful weapon to hold dexterity or fortifier arcanes. So fortifier for specifically stealing overguard and killing Eximus quickly, and dexterity if you're going to be on a more melee-focused build. And it can still perform very well with no arcane whatsoever, meaning you also don't necessarily need an arcane adapter for this to put in a lot of work. So just to show this with no arcane first, because I do think that is a really good particular use case for this, you can mow down groups pretty well with this. Like, even kind of just like, you know, randomly firing. I'm trying to get some like glancing shots on these enemies, not just fire perfectly through all their heads. This is with no arcane at all. You can get some work done. Like, these are level 225 Steel Path enemies, which of course you would almost always be bringing an arcane to fight them for. But it is really quite nice. If you just need something in your pocket that can kill a guy and hold a Dex arcane, this is really great to do that for. Or, of course, if you just want to go in on it and have it do more damage, Flare is a fantastic way to get an additional huge amount of damage. Just 480% damage is nothing to sneeze at. Obviously, that is additive with the Semi-Pistol Cannonade, but you can just consider this to be bonus damage to go with the punch through that this is going to be adding if you are going to be on Flare. And it's not like 780% damage is suddenly bad. This is, of course, going to just chew right through these enemies. Be clearly much better with Flare than without it. But, like, you know, it's just a really handy sidearm shotgun that can do some good utility work, you know, kill one guy in specific very effectively. And I like it a lot more than I expected to, and it is the first excellent on our list. Now, an unexpected good on this list, the Bramma. The Bramma is at good, and that is because this, alongside the Zarr, were very significantly nerfed, and they kind of absolutely need a lot of ammo help. For that, I am on both Vigilante Supplies, which doesn't need any ranks to do its full effect, and Ammo Drum to try and make this weapon work more often. Now, my Bramma is a heat one. I do not use the Bramma enough to, you know, go get the Toxin version and use that, and I also like it as heat more for the ways that I usually buff weapons. So if I'm going to be using this, I personally want to heat one, but I do have it listed as Toxin on the site, and you're probably going to see more success in the places you'd actually bring this if it is Toxin. If you're fighting higher level stuff, though, and you are going to make up its ammo in some one way or another, whether that's by bringing Carrier or whatnot, this build does work, and you can get through content with it. It'll have a little bit of trouble getting its like first couple of kills, and then it'll be pretty fine overall, especially like the heat procs can buff out some of its damage, especially whenever you get like kind of glancing hits on smaller enemies, especially at lower levels. So I do have this at good, mostly because the ammo issues are pretty hard to get rid of. If that's not a problem for you, you could rate this higher if you think that you're just never going to have ammo problems with it and it's all going to be okay, then that's fine. And you can do what you want with the Bramma, but I personally really avoid using it pretty much at all, as there are better choices literally within the Kuva weapons themselves for doing, I think, this exact same job at this point. But it's not bad. You can totally do content with it. It's just got problems. Moving on to a weapon that also has problems and also doesn't. We're going to talk about the Kuva Chakkurr. Now, the Kuva Chakkurr is my opportunity to talk about primary acuity being bugged and the weird build that I have on the Kuva Chakkurr. So on the site, this is listed as heat or toxin. Of course, you can do the usual thing that we've been mentioning, which is toxin, and then just use one mod to turn that into viral, and that's all fine and dandy. However, if you don't mind using acuity being bugged, which in its defense, I think that this should be multiplicative on all weapons instead of being additive normally and being bugged to be multiplicative, which is what's happening here. You can use one cold mod with it as a heat progenitor to get blast. So then you just only have blast on this weapon, and with acuity and crux, you can get quite a lot of damage and kind of put yourself into headshots only, and do some interesting work alongside of Bane to enemies. So for this, this does include a bug, and I do have a build that I can show you that is not going to be inclusive of the bug here, but it is probably the fun way to use this weapon. I think that this is like the most enjoyable way to do this, and like the blast is like very effective at killing all the enemies in groups whenever you do get it to go off, which you will quite often. And crux means you don't have to do the very long reload of the Chakkurr very often. So you get a bunch of status to make you a lot more common, or a lot more commonly see the blast. So you get that extra 300% here, and the ammo efficiency means you don't have to reload as much, two of the things that are usually problems on the Chakkurr. And acuity is making you do the Chakkurr thing, which is to hit weak points, as it is kind of a scopeless sniper. That all being said, this build does kind of revolve around a bug. If acuity was fixed, this should still be good and pretty much do this, but it will be worse if that bug gets fixed. Hopefully this gets fixed in the way that it's just multiplicative on everything, and then this will work exactly like this, but we don't know. Just to call out that it is a bugged build. This is an unbugged build. This just works like this. This just will do the thing. This is kind of your usual viral heat stuff. You do get blast, of course, on the radial attack here, but this also still utilizes internal bleeding because you are always going to get impact on the direct hits that you're going to get, and the fire rate is low enough to have that be doubled to a 70% chance for the slash procs, meaning that you're just going to get that as like a good effect most of the time, and this build will just work for stuff as well, and you of course get the benefit of Crux pretty quickly, so you're going to be able to fire quite a lot. You do kind of need to get Crux built up to really get in there with stuff and make this better, of course, but you're still getting like a good effect. You can see like in a small area you're able to like kill guys very effectively, and against like larger targets they are going to go down pretty quickly, whether that's from the procs that you're inflicting, the viral, or like the AoE that you're shooting out. Worse than the blast stuff, I think, personally, but you don't have to get headshots this way, so you can just kind of fire it into a crowd willy-nilly. Of course, you don't have to get headshots after building Crux up. You do need some of those for that, but it is also a build that it doesn't rely on any bugged mod interactions at current. So yeah, this is kind of the much more fun thing to be doing, but warning, it is bugged and could be patched. If this isn't working for you, just go back to this one. Moving on from the Chakkurr, we have the Drakgoon. The Drakgoon, unfortunately, another just MR fodder on our list here. You know, we kind of do our best. Mine is unfortunately not on the correct elemental. This should be on heat. And like the more heat you have, the more it will kind of be patched up here, as you're going to more commonly see that status. This is also on Crux, the new arcane that you are going to see quite a lot here. The 300% status chance helps a lot. The ammo efficiency helps a lot with being able to just spam. And this is really just shooting a lot. One of the big kind of like negatives of the Drakgoon is that it is a charge weapon that you want to use on a tap fire most of the time. And that's just going to look like this. The bouncing you get from its like special mod is better in tight spaces, so it's like not being shown off greatly here. And against single targets, you do want to charge it and just get headshots, where it can, of course, charge Crux very easily. But usually you're just going to be tap firing it down hallways. But you can see it's not very impressive. Like, this is just not a very impressive weapon. It's, you know, both of its modes are really underwhelming. You're not going to get a lot out of like charge firing it and like getting headshots on it, like the larger enemies. You'd be much better off with the Chakkurr for that, where you don't even need to charge, and like the basic fire is going to be outpaced by most other like Kuva weapons, especially. But there's just far better things to be using. It's novel, but the damage just really is not there for this thing, and I don't think it is particularly worth using, which is really unfortunate because I think this skin is phenomenal. Moving on from the Drakgoon, we are going to move back into our other heavy weapon, which is going to be the Kuva Grattler. Now, this one is a little bit of a different story. I have this one placed as good, but it is worth noting that that is in relation to like the worth of farming other Kuva weapons. In terms of it being an arc gun, it is actually quite powerful. It does quite a bit for being an arc gun, and it is actually worth bringing as part of your gear, whenever you can use gear, into EDA as kind of an always have a good weapon option. Now, worth noting that mine is a radiation one. Again, this should be heat. It would be better were it a heat weapon, but it's not a weapon that I'm, you know, particular about fixing that on. I was hunting down different ephemeras to use. So it will look better if you do have a heat one, but it's pretty good. You don't really need it to be heat in order for it to be effective. The one thing I will note about this is that for whatever reason, on current patch, this weapon actually has infinite enemy punch through. So if we show this again, if I don't fire at enemies' feet, you'll actually see it go through them, do very little damage, and it's actually exploding in the background there and not killing all the enemies on the sides. This weapon's not supposed to have any punch through, so that's a bit odd, but just make sure you fire at the ground, and then things will go much better for you. It's a bit of an oddity with this weapon, probably just a bug that's been overlooked for a while. But overall, the Grattler is a really nice thing to have around in situations where you are locked to particular gear and you can just call in your literal gear in order to have a real gun. But yeah, that is the Grattler. Pretty happy with that one overall. Speaking of being pretty happy, we're going to get to talk about the Kuva Heck. Now, the Kuva Heck, with the 1999 update, kind of got a new lease on life. This weapon has been absolutely stellar, and that is, of course, combined with semi-shotgun cannonade being good on this weapon as well. Scattered Justice Of course, being usable on it for the extra 200% multi-shot is huge and also allows this weapon to heal you. But the big thing is Primary Crux. Now, Primary Crux effectively builds up in one shot. And once you have it built up, it's not hard to keep it built up. It gives you an absolute ton of status, so it's like you're firing the old Tigris. And the ammo efficiency makes your total ammo capacity of the weapon around 12 shots, allowing you to use your alternate fire multiple times per reload, and also treat the Kuva Heck like it's a machine gun, which is very effective. It's worth noting that with this build, this is actually the build I was using to farm liches to fix some of my weapons that were on really weird elements. And it one-taps liches. It kills Archons very easily. It one-taps lich heads. It is really, really good. This is not the alternate fire. This is just me shooting the main fire. Even if I go for like a glancing shot here, you will see that it will kill most of the enemies in this row except for the heavy unit that I barely hit in the arm. That is really, really powerful, and needing to reload this little with the Kuva Heck is, of course, excellent. If you do decide to use the alternate fire of this weapon, you'll build up once, and then get to alt fire, and just, you know, if you build it up in one shot, you can alt fire twice before needing to reload, which is really ridiculous. And of course, alt firing through crowds of enemies is going to send them directly to whatever they worship. Yeah, it's really good. Having this much status and this much damage up front is particularly powerful, and I think in a lot of cases you will choose to bring this just to enemies that need to die now that are unattenuated. Or even if they are attenuated, this does a pretty good job of chunking them down. So yeah, that's where the Heck is at current. Now, moving on to a weapon that, you know, has received some criticism in the past for being not particularly good. This weapon has actually, weirdly, also received quite a bit in recent memory. So we are on Primary Crux for this as well. The ammo efficiency helps a lot. And it's worth noting that I am on Toxin here. Once again, heat would be better. Toxin, totally fine, but heat would be significantly better as it will weight my procs towards heat much more heavily, which would be a significant improvement for this build. Now, with that, Crux is the more important part of that, as you're just going to get way, way, way more status in general, and you're able to just like machine gun through enemies very quickly with all of the punch through and just like, you know, various procs that you can chunk down on enemies. Now, this weapon is not like the Heck and listed as like an excellent weapon that has a ton of variety of uses, but if you just like a good burst fire machine gun and you like don't have like the burst in yet with its incarnate, I think this thing is pretty solid. You could do content with this. I wouldn't suggest switching it off the burst fire to either the semi-auto fire, which has this ridiculous recoil, or the auto, which is just worse burst fire at this point. So the other fire modes don't really do anything for it. But on the burst fire, it's perfectly serviceable. It does a lot of status. It's got like a lot of rounds in the magazine, especially considering Crux. And it does a pretty good job overall, so I have that rated at good. Now, unfortunately, the Kuva Karak is here. Now, the Kuva Karak I do have on the correct elemental, though it is a low elemental. And let's just be honest. This thing was the AK-47 stand-in, and it was fine. It was liked because it was an AK-47 stand-in. However, the AX-52 exists and is just a purely better version of this gun. So there's really no reason to pick this thing up. I do consider it to be mastery fodder. Obviously, this is utilizing Crux to try and, like, you know, get some advantage out of that, and then otherwise going for the usuals in terms of the build. And it's fine. This is okay. But it's not, like, I mean, plain and simple, the AX-52 is much better. If you want an AK-47, you go get the AX-52. Theoretically, you could get this before then, but you shouldn't. You should get a different one of the Kuva weapons and then get to 1999 and get the AX-52. It's acceptable. If you got this in like an EDA role or like a Steel Path circuit, you'd use it, you'd shoot it at guys, but like, it's not worth farming compared to the other Kuva weapons you could be picking up, especially not the weapon we're talking about next, which is going to be the Kohm. Now, the Kohm is an interesting case, as there is a thing to particularly note about the way that it is built. Now, this weapon, I think, can be heat or magnetic, and you're going to see big benefits on either one you go. The Kohm generally really hates Eximus, I find, so having magnetic is good, but benefit, if you go heat, you do get to run magnetic strafe, and magnetic strafe for shotguns has a 40% fire rate bonus on it. Fire rate bonuses are particularly potent on the Kohm, as it has a lot of rounds to fire that it would like to shoot faster, and is also a good reason why if you can bring reinforced bond on your sentinel, that will also boost the Kuva Kohm up quite a bit. It also, because of its ammo consumption, really loves to have ammo efficiency, and the status chance does not go missed. So this is like just very heavily invested into heat mods here, as you can easily see. If you do have a magnetic one instead of magnetic strafe, you will just use the dual stat heat mod, and of course move frigid blast and toxic barrage over here, which I'll just do now just for clarity's sake. If you just like have a magnetic version, you'll just use the dual stat heat mod here. You'll lose some fire rate, which is going to be a negative if you don't find fire rate somewhere else. But luckily there is another option here. You will lose some magazine capacity, but you can drop Shotgun Elementalist, which will lose you some damage, in favor of just a pure fire rate mod. Though, if you don't want to add the dual stat heat mod, you could also just add a pure fire rate mod instead of magnetic strafe. So there's a few options depending on if it is a heat or a magnetic weapon in terms of what you can do with the Kuva Kohm. But the Kuva Kohm is just like, it's very effective, and it shoots basically forever. Even if you do have fire rate added to this thing, once you're on Crux, it charges up super fast, as you can see there. And then you can just, you know, shotgun machine gun, AA-12, just rip and tear through crowds of enemies and just not have to reload. Just do what you gotta do. Just do what you gotta do. Keep shooting. And that's pretty much going to be like what's going on with the Kohm. It can output a lot of damage for a long time and is very, very effective at it. So yeah, Kohm, very good. Have it as excellent on the tier list here. Now, unfortunately, one that's not so excellent is going to be the Kuva Kraken. Now, the Kuva Kraken, again, like the Karak, it's not unusable. It's fine. I will say you do need to find a source of punch through, otherwise it is not fine. Luckily, Merciless Gunfight being a new addition to giving us punch through on secondary weapons, but this being a burst weapon is a huge downside because the semi-autos getting the punch through for free is kind of enormous. And we are, of course, on Cascadia Flare. If you're not on Heat, you could, of course, just, you know, run it with Merciless or whatnot. But overall, you're probably not going to run the Kuva Kraken at all, as opposed to doing it, because it's just not very effective. I would say it's also not particularly good in terms of ammo economy, but that's mostly because the bullets themselves are not particularly effective. You have to reload often. You basically need headshots on heavies to really feel like you're getting anywhere, and it's just not a fantastic experience. It's okay. It's usable. If I was buffing it significantly with something, I'd be like, this is all right. But it is not worth farming as a Kuva weapon, especially not to higher percentages. Now, moving on, we have a weapon that is absolutely worth farming to higher percentages, and that being the Kuva Nukor, one of the most used weapons in the entire game. And for the Kuva Nukor, you can put this on Heat or Magnetic, and they're both fine. I would tend towards Magnetic on this weapon, though, as I do find it has a little bit more trouble than other weapons with enemies that have Overguard, and the addition of Magnetic makes this one of the better weapons to bring for farming Profit Taker if you're interested in getting a very large amount of credits. The build is this. You could, of course, swap out Elementalist with a different mod, but I find that the reload speed is quite good here, and the status damage for our Heat is quite nice as well. And the big weird thing on this is that there's no crit chance mod, and that is because we have dropped our Arcane for Merciless and the usual suspects for secondary Enervate. So this is on hit, increases critical chance by 10%. That resets after 6 big critical hits. So because this weapon has such tremendously bad crit chance, this is a final addition to your crit. So every time you hit an enemy, you get 10% raw crit, meaning you go from 7%, 17, 27, 37, so on and so forth, until you get those much higher level crits. The Kuva Nukor hits exceedingly fast, so you will get a lot of better critical chance than you'd ever get from any kind of crit chance add that you could have here from secondary Enervate, which is quite nice. Secondary Enervate also works without needing to build up on anything, though we are still running Galvanized Shots, so there is a little bit of build up to be had. And it's just very, very effective overall. Magnetic gives you 2 extra statuses instead of 1 on the various Eximi that you're going to need to pound through. And just in general, it being extra for Gal Shot works well. So you'll see after you kill like 1 enemy, this will just kind of evaporate the crowds here, getting that Gal Shot bonus, and is just tremendously good. just tremendously good. I mean, it's the Kuva Nukor. Not everything has changed with it. It's an amazing weapon. Of course, I have it at excellent on the tiering here. And that goes alongside the next kind of whole run of amazing weapons, with the Kuva Sobek being up next. The Kuva Sobek. Now, this is a weird one. It's probably the weirdest one of the bunch of Kuva weapons, because I think the preferred progenitor for this is actually electricity. And that is for a variety of reasons, mainly revolving around the synergies that this weapon has with different Warframes. So, if you are using this with Site 09, you want this to be an electric weapon because you're going to put electric procs guaranteed on it from Site 09, and also purple shards will usually come into play there as well if you're going down a really big weapon buffing build with Site 09. In addition to that, with Zephyr, with the grouping, you want electric procs. They do their damage instantaneously, and the AoE from the grouping you get on Zephyr, she wants electricity. Whenever you use this with Frost, with Zadas, or any Warframe with Zadas as their subsume, it's incredibly effective to have this be on electricity for the extra upfront damage, so you can get the instant pops more consistently. And the laundry list just continues to compound for you to want an electric Sobek. Electricity is very similar to heat, but if you go heat, you will get better performance whenever this weapon is not being combined with a bunch of Warframes. But if you go heat, you cannot combine it in the same way with all of those Warframes and get the same effects. So I think that the different synergy cases for the Sobek mean that you should probably just go electricity, and it might perform a little bit worse completely on its own, but whenever you start combining it with literally anything, it will be much, much better. And because that's what the Sobek is normally for, that's probably the way you should go. Now, in terms of the build, it's worth noting that a few things can be moved around here pretty easily. So Galvanized Savvy, first and foremost. If you just need the upfront damage, you need the damage now. Prime Point Blank is here. Also, we're on Primary Crux. This is for being able to, not need to reload, and the various things you've seen on the other high pellet count weapons that can instantly just completely fill up the buff on Crux. Much higher status chance is, of course, very good. Being able to shoot for long periods of time into tons and tons of enemies is, of course, very good. This can still be things like Deadhead, especially if you're someone like Site 09, as that's going to be very, very good there. And you can switch this to just being Merciless, especially if you don't have Crux. That's just fine. And that is going to give you more upfront damage, as status is kind of backloaded damage, although not really with the electricity being considered, as electricity applies its damage instantaneously. So, of the tests, it is worth noting, I do have this weapon rated as excellent, but whenever it is used alone, it's probably more of a good weapon. It builds up a bit and then has some good damage that it outputs, and of course you're relying on acid shells for a good amount of the damage that it's outputting, as you can see it killing parts of the crowd here. It's also worth noting on the known issues list right now, the hit detection for acid shells is listed to be fixed. So it's not performing as well as it should be right now. So there is that to consider as well. So it has some buildup on its own. It's a little it's good for a lot of stuff, but please take into consideration that the Sobek is mostly going to be combined with other things to great effect, because acid shells is very effective. So with that, we can move on to the Ogris. Now, the Ogris is an interesting case. I have the Ogris listed at excellent, and it, along with the Zarr and the Bramma, were all nerfed in terms of their ammo. But I think that the Ogris was hit the least hard and has the most benefits to it still. So for the build, it looks like this. It is on a heat progenitor. This is a minimum heat progenitor. It is very worth noting that if you do want to farm out any progenitor from the minimum value, 25, to the maximum value being 60%, you'll pretty much get a just consistent 20 to 30% total damage increase across the board, which is significant. And because this is a minimum, I wanted to call that out because it's important to note just how good this weapon still is. Although part of that is because Semi-Rifle Cannonade is giving us a very large initial boost to damage, which is helping us build up our Merciless much more quickly. And this weapon takes a really large advantage of Rifle Elementalist, all being very, very good things. With that, you'll note that this weapon does not build up, it does not need a bunch of status, because we're going to be getting a ton of status out of a Night Watch Napalm. So we are on just Malignant. We get to use full power cryo rounds. And we're on just a 90% Hellfire Elemental as well. And we just have enough room for everything. I don't think you need more than Vigilante supplies on this weapon. And if you want to really just only primarily ever use this, you could also bring Carrier. But I think this weapon performs just fine, even with its lowered ammo as it stands currently. You'll fire 3 shots, and that's normally going to kill a lot of the lesser enemies, and that'll build you up. And then you're going to get this nice lingering damage that's going to build pretty quickly and kill everyone else. That is 2 magazines to kill that group of enemies, but as a reminder, Merciless stays built up for a pretty considerably long time. So even letting a couple stacks fall off here as I talk, if we just pump these enemies back out after having lost a couple stacks, you'll see that the damage is still very effective if you just like let the napalm do its work at killing those heavy units, even with not maxed Merciless stacks right away. Sometimes you'll need one more shot, I suppose. But I think that the Ogris is still very, very compelling, and it's, you know, a thing that is definitely worthwhile to use, unless you're, you know, needing to fire at very, very long distances, unless you're taking it to Profit Taker, where it's actually a weird meta choice right now. But yeah, that's what the the Kuva Ogris is up to. Much better than I thought it was initially going to be whenever I started retesting it. Speaking of that exact experience, the Kuva Quartakk. So, of note, long time I've said this whenever people ask me this question on stream, which happens constantly, what my favorite weapon that's not really a meta thing is. I've said the Quartakk for literally years. I really, really enjoy the Quartakk. I think it is a satisfying weapon that I enjoy an absolute ton. That being said, it is really good now. With 1999 and the addition of Primary Crux, the way that this weapon works is just phenomenal. The very high status means you can really just kick out some extreme damage on enemies, and it will sometimes often work as a slightly lower damage, way more range version of what the Kuva Heck is doing now. So, the build looks like this. Pretty normal stuff, what you'd come to expect. I am on Magnetic. You could go Heat or Magnetic, but for me particularly, I want the Xmas to make sure they find their grave. So, we are on Magnetic for the Kuva Quartakk, and I did have that changed recently. And this weapon is just phenomenal. Now, it does have a weird quirk to how it works. If you hip fire it, you're going to get the auto fire, which is actually very good at taking down Nully Bubbles. And whenever you aim down sight, you're going to get the very strong burst fire. The burst fire is considerably more damage and also is extremely good at building up Crux. So you're going to very, very quickly get an absolute ton of damage from this weapon. You have, like, you know, of course, the considerable punch through from having Primed Shred on here and everything. And it will tear through enemies very effectively, especially whenever you're getting headshots. I will specifically not get headshots here so you can see the damage elsewise, otherwise, and it's really, really nice. Now, you do, of course, have to aim down sight in order to get it to start doing burst fire, but you can also zoom out after you start shooting it, and it will keep firing in burst fire. And the same is true in reverse. If you start shooting it in auto and then aim down sight, you can get it in auto while you're ADS. So it's a very convenient multi-fire weapon. You don't need any kind of, like, you know, weirdness of, like, it's fire changing. There's no alt fire stuff to worry about there. It just does all of it automatically, which is another thing I really like about it. I think this weapon is absolutely phenomenal. But once again, it is one of my favorite weapons in Warframe to use, so maybe I'm overrating it a little bit, so take it with a small grain of salt. Try it for yourself. I really love this weapon in particular. Now, we have two weapons to talk about that I don't love in particular. First being the Kuva Seer. Now, the Kuva Seer, we'll show the build first, of course, is pretty normal stuff here. There's not a lot to be done. At least it gets semi-pistol cannonade until you find out how this weapon works. And, you know, other than that, it's doing pretty normal pistol stuff, and there's not a lot to write home about. Now, the unfortunate thing is that the Kuva Seer is not allowed to have punch-through, so even though it gets the semi-pistol cannonade, it has no punch-through. And it has very low damage besides. Taking multiple shots to do much of anything and needing to reload very frequently. Even when you're getting headshots, you're going to find this weapon to be very, very underwhelming and have to reload so often and also not have a lot of overall bullets. It is real bad. It doesn't get anything that you would really want it to get, and while you can force it to do content, it is able to kill these enemies. I think it is a horrifically bad time, especially considering the forced additional zoom that the Seer weapons have. So yeah, it's just terrible. If you like this, praise mighty Seer, I suppose, but it is truly and actually awful. Speaking of truly and actually awful, we have the Kuva Shildeg. Now, this is another weapon that you can use. You can force yourself to use it. And on this build, we have kind of gone all the way with trying to absolutely force it to work. We are on the Smite Aroken mod here as well to try and just give this thing something to do. We're on melee duplicate so that our crits are going to hit twice. And we're going to be doing a heavy slam build for it, which is all fine and dandy. You know, it's fine. It's not good. It will kill these enemies, and if you need it to be forced to kill enemies, then it will do such a thing. It's not letting me heavy attack. Here we go. Weird. Okay, fixed it. Don't know what was causing that. Enemies respawned now. We're back with Kuva Shildeg. Like I said, this weapon can kill enemies. You can see there are a few enemies died, and we built it for a combo now. And it can do like a couple 100,000 damage, millions of damage if you hit on heads reasonably. And like, you know, you can do slam attack stuff with it. It's, you know, it does kill enemies. It exists. It's a weapon. You can hit guys with it. It's not good. It exists. You wouldn't choose this over like most other things, and it's, you know, it is what it is. You'd normally just go electric on this because maybe you could make something with influence work on it, but like, let's be realistic. You're not going to use this weapon unless you absolutely have to if you're just trying to get all your mastery for leveling it. Moving on, though, to a weapon that you probably actually would use, that is going to be the Kuva Tonkor. Now, the Kuva Tonkor, we have some weird things to talk about with the Kuva Tonkor. So this is the build for the Kuva Tonkor that I have been using, and there's a few things to note about it. Number one, I am on heat. You could argue that you could go Toxin on this weapon, as there's kind of a lot of mods that you might want to include on it, but I personally like this much, much more with it being a heat progenitor and then actually including even some more heat for the scaling on it, and to weight it towards heat a little bit more. With that, this weapon, weirdly, is actually kind of a good candidate for Crux, but I know in my heart of hearts that you guys don't want to aim at heads if you're firing a grenade launcher. So this build also works perfectly well for primary merciless. You do want to hit enemies, as I've included precision strike, but you could very easily also drop precision strike for a number of different options. I know primed firestorm is of course going to be a very popular pick for that. If you just wanted to hit as many guys as possible, that is of course going to be quite nice, and you can see the range increase here is pretty significant. But for me personally, precision strike I think works just fine. The faster reload so I can fire more, I do find to be a little bit more beneficial than the AoE. With that, it looks like this. Force of Habit firing at heads again. And you can see the heat procs doing quite a bit there to burn down enemies that I leave hanging around here. It looks like 15,000 damage over and over. And significant increases from the reload speed. Now, just to show off the Crux stuff, as I do think it is pretty compelling, Crux with very few stacks allows you to shoot twice every time you reload. Meaning, in my case, I think it's much more reasonable to drop Precision Strike for Primed Firestorm if you are a little adept at getting some headshot hits. Because once you get those headshot hits, you're getting 2 shots every time you reload, effectively making it half as much reloading as you'd normally need to do. So if you get 1 headshot, reload, and you can fire twice. And you only need to get 1 headshot every 10 seconds in order to have 2 grenades fire out of this thing. You can also, of course, just choose to fire those in different directions, which I think is pretty efficient. The increased status also doesn't hurt, as the more status you have, the more likely you are to get those highly damaging heat procs. So for me personally, I do like Crux on this thing. If you don't want to have to aim at enemies or heads, of course, we did mention that you can just go Merciless and Firestorm, and that's going to totally work. But for me, I do like Crux on this weapon, getting to drop the special Tonkor mod or Prime Firestorm. That being said, the reload's also still good. So if you don't have Primed Firestorm, just stick with this, and it'll be a good time. Moving on from the Tonkor, we do have the the twin Stubbas. For some reason, they're called that instead of Stubba. Should have been Stubba. But these weapons are pretty normal. They exist. It's another pair of dual pistols that are machine guns. They're fine. These, of course, don't get access to the semi-mod for the nice punch-through, so we do kind of have to find room for Merciless Gunfight to make them look like they're doing anything. And they exist. I wouldn't farm these, but they exist. They are real. They exist corporeally, and you know, you can shoot bullets. It's not the worst. It's fine. It's a Kuva weapon. It's fine. It's something. It's not nothing, and that's, you know, that counts for something in this day and age. I think something and not nothing is one of my favorite things. So yeah, they're okay. If you really like them for whatever reason, 2 thumbs up, 2 guns, whatever it takes. Moving on, though, to our final, we have the Zarr to talk about. Now, the Zarr is weird. The Zarr is very weird because its ammo got hit probably the hardest out of any of the weapons on the Kuva list, and it's a bit tough out here. We are on ammo drum to have more ammo maximum, And I would say that in most cases, you're probably going to want to drop Firestorm for ammo mutation as well, just to try and keep this weapon topped off with ammo. That, of course, is a different story if you're using something like Sights 2 to continuously refill it with ammo, and there's some weird things you can do with that as kind of its own full build. But if you're just using the Zarr by itself, it has a really long reload, and it has very, very little ammo, and those are two huge downsides that make me put this in good. Now, it is worth noting that I am on a magnetic valence bonus, and that is because I didn't really want to go heat, and I also didn't really want to go toxin. The reasons for either is because there are some synergies that you kind of lose out on if you go heat, and you're kind of locked into the one mod thing if you go toxin. Magnetic is a nice split of both. You can still kind of do whatever build you really want to do. Obviously, you can't do one element builds, although you kind of can if you just want to go magnetic heat and then use nourish or viral, but that's besides the point. It's, magnetic is a nice split of the difference. I could do a lot of different things with the Zarr, so that's what I did choose to do. And this works fine. You'll note that I'm on Wildfire just to have another round in the magazine, just so I can get a little bit more out of it. And also, you do technically start with one more shot that way. And it's serviceable. The big saving grace, I think, of the Zarr is that primary crux is very easy to stack up. That is because of Barrage. Barrage is essentially a shotgun that is on the Kuva Zarr. I do really wish that it just fired whenever you clicked the Alt Fire button, as opposed to swapping modes and then having to shoot. But it does charge up crux instantly, and that means that every single one of the cannonballs in your magazine is then tripled, which is nice to have and probably the best way to use this overall. And the status isn't missed either. So we can just shoot once. You can see primary crux is fully charged up. Then we have nice, really high status to fire out a bunch of cannonballs, and that didn't even use the full magazine. So the extra ammo efficiency is a really huge boon to this. Unfortunately, this bug exists that makes you take 1,000 years reloading. Luckily, you can just swap twice to fix it. Hopefully that bug gets fixed soon, because it makes using the Zarr even more painful with its already, 1,000 ice ages long reload. But using this weapon with crux does give you a pretty feasible way to utilize it most of the time. But that reload and that ammo max is still going to hurt kind of no matter what you do, especially if you are not running the ammo drum. And I think that, additionally, the cost of having to open up the X list just to make this a little bit more usable is pretty rough. But yeah, that's the Kuva Zarr. It's still, obviously, from the performance in terms of its killing power, quite good, but it has those really big downsides, I think, weighing it down to make it especially not a convenient choice as a first Kuva weapon. But one that you probably won't use that much, even if you do have some of the particular builds for it, unless you're specifically going for the gimmicky sight build that you can do. But yeah, that is all 20 of the Kuva weapons. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you to see some of the builds we're on now, and it probably has also convinced you that crux is good, because it is. Yeah, that's going to do it. Hopefully this video has helped out and just helped you update your builds and stuff. Quickly approaching, there will be a Tenet video going over all of the Tenet weapons. There's a lot more melees to talk about there that are actually going to be very solid. So hopefully you're looking forward to that, and I'll see you in that video. Goodbye. All right. Hey, turns out you have to record these more often than I have been. My huge apologies, but thank you very much to all of the patrons who have been sticking with. It is very much appreciated because things got weird during the streamathon. But thank you to Athean, Angel SPM, Arbiter Daydream, Barkus, Benuven, Plotomatic, Brutus Salazar, Canolathra, Dylan Dworsky, Athrain, James Harsthorn, Josh, Bluzanth, Mikokel, Minty Ginja, Michta, Nerve, Ruby, Sanyu, Skur, Sharp247, The Coupon of Death, Waifu Wars, Zeraphir, Alex Barnum, Bob World 3, JC4 Science, and World01, and of course all of the other $5 and $2 patrons. It is extremely appreciated. I'll try and keep this more updated now that the 4 months of Streamathon is over. Good lord. But yeah, lots more guides happening. I think I'm going to be looking to get the site guides kind of done for at least the CPR, and that's kind of the plan going forward if you're curious on updates for the channel.